So in this video, let's talk about the bumpy road to enlightenment, the bumpy road to no self. And when I was a kid, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, I would have what modern psychology would call dissociative experiences where none of this seemed real. And it was very, very entertaining to me. In fact, I would try to grasp that experience and make it as long as possible. But every time it was elusive. When I got a little older, I would have the same experience, but it was something that caused me anxiety, so I'd try to push it away. And the harder I'd push, the more it established itself, the more anxiety took place. And so we're all familiar, if you're watching this channel, you've heard stories of Eckhart Tolle. He describes it at the beginning of The Power of Now, where he went from absolute intense anxiety to absolute intense peace overnight. And it stuck. It never reestablished itself. Ram Dass talks about how his self just fell into pieces and the self-illusion was no more. Gary Weber talks about how the voice in the head was silenced for good. And so it leads so many of us to believe that this path is like shutting off a light. It's shut off, and once it's shut off, it's for good, and there's nothing but peace and bliss from that moment on. It's very possible, but not talked about as much, that this road isn't just a flick of a switch, but it's a bumpy road with ups and downs and turbulence and backs and forths. And that could be much, much more accurate. And it could be due to the oppositional nature of the mind. And very few people have talked about this. My videos go on and on because I think it's very important. So Ellen Watts, Aldous Huxley, Viktor Frankl all discussed how there's this oppositional nature to the mind. And Frankl put it this way, that it's our desire for happiness that actually pushes happiness away. In the Neurotics Guide, I wrote that the closest point to enlightenment is also the furthest. So the closest point to no self is also the furthest point from no self. So we have these experiences of no self, and it's incredibly peaceful. There are no more problems. But then the mind kicks in, and it wants what it can't have. Its absence. And it reestablishes itself by its old tricks, anxiety and depression. So we're a very, very, as I've been reflecting on in these videos, strange species, because we're calm when we're anxious, but we're also anxious when everything is calm. And so the Taoists have pointed out the relationship between opposites. And that's something that we can bring in to this bumpy road. I actually think it was very well described by Seinfeld. There's one episode where they were talking about you can't just get out of a relationship like flicking a switch. It's like turning over a Coke vending machine. You have to rock it back and forth, and then eventually it falls over. Well, that's the same thing with the self-experience. It's a bumpy road that goes back and forth between periods of no self and then the mind trying to reestablish itself through anxiety, depression. The mind would rather exist and suffer than see through as an illusion. And while you're on this bumpy road, I think the best advice came from the Sirgadatta. And Ramana Maharshi both said the same thing as an emphasis. The mind is going to go on this bumpy road, but you are not the mind. So why concern yourself with what it's doing?